Lesley Gilchrist, welcome to the Live on Form podcast.
Very pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
No, it's my pleasure. So Lesley, just as a quick intro and a bio to our community, you are CEO and founder of My-Expert Midwife, who are a multi-award winning brand, I must say, providing primarily, I guess, skincare products for all stages of pregnancy, but more than that, you built a community where you do antenatal classes and webinars and blogs, etc. Just explain a little bit about, the brand in a nutshell and what it is you guys do.
So the brand came about through the necessity of providing women with products that actually dealt with the real need, the unmet need in pregnancy. So pain relief, healing, wound healing, prevention of infection. It's solution-based skincare, almost quasi-medical. And my background is as a practicing midwife. I'm still a midwife. I'm still registered. So it was very much through a community of women that as a midwife, I knew that they needed this, and there was just nothing out there. And speaking to other midwives, there was nothing that we could offer women. And also from an education side of things, as midwives, we recognize that the information that women get is very much shrouded in this protective bubble that we almost became frightened of worrying, scaring women. So what in effect happened was we weren't being honest with them about the realities of childbirth and the realities of postnatal recovery and the realities of bringing home a baby and parenting. And we decided that that's what we needed to do. We needed to offer a platform that if women wanted to seek out that advice and that information that was honest, it was their reality, and it was truly preparing them for parenthood, that we could really affect change, really positive change for that whole triad, that mother, infant, father. And that was the driver behind the antenatal classes in particular, because we just felt that women needed that broad base of information education, but we needed some way of actually bringing in the dads that, they're so vital. And, there's so much has changed, really. You go back 20, 30, even 40 years, and males were very much seen as no involvement at all in the birthplace. It was very much a female role. And the whole relationship dynamics throughout, not just, the Western world, through most of the world, has changed so much that it's seen as a partnership. Men's roles have changed so much, but we still seem to be anchored in the past when it comes to maternity. And I suppose in some way it's because it's a mostly female profession, midwifery, and it draws feminists. And in some way or how, we've almost managed to exclude men. And that's just perpetuated and gone on and on and on and on. And we've not done it deliberately, and I don't think women have done it deliberately. I think we've just seen it as very much a female place to be.
Yeah, but I guess, I guess a couple of questions there, just to kind of unpack a few things. I guess, firstly, do you think there's a generational shift towards the role of the father, and is that changing? You kind of insinuate that it is, but it's still quite old-fashioned in some circles. I mean, certainly, if you look to my dad and how my dad was at my birth, it was dramatically different to how I was at the birth of my two children. And then, I guess, going back to your mentioning of midwives and the the perceived lack of preparation for the mother, is that because again that feels like a generational shift. Like, speaking to my mum, who is now in her 70s, she said when she had me, for example, and my sister, the role of the midwife was quite different to what it was, for instance, when my wife had our two children. And is there a change in role? Is it a quota issue? Is it is it an issue of the amount of beds, and therefore, women aren't spending as long in hospital postnatal? Because I know my mum, she always goes back and said, listen, when I had you, I slept at night, and the midwife came in and took care of you, fed you, looked after you. Whereas my wife didn't have so much that. And I'm not sure there's even a preparation for that as well.
So there's two sides to that coin, I think. Home is definitely the best place to recover for a woman. Hospital, look, that's where you're going to catch infections. So from a health point of view, getting women home as quickly as possible is definitely the safest thing for them. But what we didn't do at the same time was look at what are the benefits of being in hospital, because they were vast. Women were in for a week, and visitors were very much limited. The ward sister wouldn't let lots and lots of different people in. So women got rest. They were able to eat and drink as they would want to. They were able to breastfeed their babies as often as they wanted to. And that's the biggest part that we lost, that whole support and lack of disruption of that outer circle of your friendship group and your support group.
Yeah, I know, because my wife's this, a smart lady, but I guess there's no preparation for, and we did antenatal classes and they were quite brief. She's a smart lady, very capable, but that kind of, postnatal, that initial period of massive change, there was a real kind of fear within her, a real kind of fear and anxiety of not doing the right thing. And I think in those first 24 to 48 hours, she was really, you're almost looking for a maternal instinct to yourself as a mother.
And I think that's probably one of the biggest problems we have as well, with the way that our communities evolve from 100 years ago to 50 years ago to now. We don't grow up in households of 13, 14 siblings where you actually watch what it's like to parent. You grow up, so you get to your own sort of parenthood stage, and you probably brought up half your sisters and brothers.
Yep.
And we don't have that now. So what we talk about as a maternal instinct and a paternal instinct isn't an instinct at all. The instinct is to understand that your baby needs fed. And your instinct is to understand that to hold a baby close is what it needs. Anything above and beyond that is what you learn by watching your parents or aunts or sisters raise a child. And that's what we miss. So then we end up in a situation where we're saying to parents, well, here you go. We're going to give you all this support in pregnancy, all this surveillance. We're going to look after you in labor and birth, where we're not even going to take our eyes off you for 24 hours. In fact, there may be a midwife and a doctor. And then you're going to have a baby. And then we say to you, there you go. Off you go. We're not even going to give you preparation for this bit. We're just giving you preparation for the actual childbirth bit.
Yep.
That arguably is the bit that women can do because nature makes sure that happens. The actual maternal infant bond, the paternal infant bond, everything else is not. That's not an instinct. Surviving on 4 hours sleep, that's not an instinct. Both of you being so exhausted, that women are answering the door to the postman with the boob out.
Yeah,
because she's just so exhausted. Dad's so exhausted that they're booking the wrong flights to the wrong airport. And these are situations that happen, because the parents have told me this, in floods of tears usually, because this is what's happened, because they see that as a failure, because they felt that they should have been able to do this. There's no support like there is for pregnancy. Therefore, it mustn't be needed. Therefore, I mustn't need it. And the fact that I do need it would suggest that I'm somehow failing. And it's not that at all. It's just that, as society has evolved, we haven't evolved our education and support that we put in place. We take away that support that women had in hospital for that week postnatally, and we don't replace that support. And, we've got this big campaign that will be coming out on birth partners, because, you know, as midwives and as a brand, we recognized how vital these birth partners, and it's that in-home, that live-in partner that we're talking about now, be it male or female. And what we're saying is we really need to offer a package of information and education for them so that they can say, right, I can help you in labor. I can do all that stuff to help you give birth. And then I'm going to be the one at home that's helping you recover, that's organizing to keep the visitors, you know, at a minimum for those first 2 weeks. It's that we're not doing. And that's what we as a brand want to do. We want to educate that partner, that live-in partner, so that they can fulfill that role.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, that resonates massively with me. I mean, with the birth of our son, Jackson. We had children quite late. I was 38. And I can remember assuming, yeah, I'm definitely ready. I'm mature enough. I've kind of done my homework and I've done my reading, and that kind of moment where my wife's water's broken, that and we shot to the hospital. So I got a speeding ticket on the way to the hospital, for the simple reason that the change in her, I just wasn't prepared for. Her entire system changed. The pain she was clearly in, I wasn't prepared for, which is ridiculous because you should be, but I wasn't prepared for. And then the actual time in hospital, and so my wife had 2 emergency C-sections, and the first one, I can just remember, I mean, sheer terror. A lot of, I think there's certainly, it might be changing now, but certainly before we had our first child, all I remember is the romance of how kind of beautiful birth is. And I'm pretty sure it is for a lot of people. For me, for our 2, it was just pure terror and a kind of anxiety and, fear for my, fear for my wife, and then fear for our first son, and then having to make decisions that I just not assumed I'd had to make. And then, the preparation of, helping my wife recover through a emergency C-section, which I didn't really know anything about. I mean, I'd heard about it. And I know my wife didn't want one, but she just had no choice. So there's that as well. The feeling of guilt, which I think is I think something I'd like to talk about later. But certainly I wasn't prepared for those 2 to 3 weeks of, sort of helping to look after, probably doing more than 50% of looking after a child, but also looking after, my wife, who had in 2 weeks massively changed.
I think, from a woman's point of view, if you speak to women about the birth experience, they would say it was tough. It really shocked me how intense it was and painful. The reason that they would say that they felt frightened or traumatized is because they don't have control. And I'm not talking about control over what their body's doing, about the decisions that they can make. When you talk to men about what traumatized them about birth, they talk about seeing someone that in their eyes was a mentally strong equal to them in terrible pain and verbalizing it. And it's, for men, they would say it's not the fact of seeing them in pain. It was the verbalization of that pain, the things that they were saying.
Shocking. Absolutely shocking. I just wasn't, my wife's very calm, and we talked about, and we talked about examples of birth we've seen, and you kind of self-righteously say to yourself, and she would admit it, I don't think I'd do that. I don't think I'd be in so much pain. I don't think I'd make such a commotion. And that just goes immediately. and it went for her immediately. And I was, it was very surprising. And then the operation as well itself, and she went through a real kind of, sort of during the process of removing our son, she was, really shaking really, really badly, in shock, incoherent. And that for me was a massive eye opener. It's something that I just wasn't prepared for at all. And I guess the reality is, women have been going through that without the man for decades.
They have, but they've gone through it having probably watched, because most births were at home, so they've probably, before they've had babies themselves, they'll have seen birth. They'll have seen what that reality is. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have at the moment is we don't talk about the reality of birth. We don't do it well enough. We don't do it honestly enough. And we do women and their partners, we do them a huge disservice when it actually comes to birth, because we expect them to be warriors on 2 hours sleep with a baby and recovering and still crack on and do things. We expect that, and to have visitors and make them tea. That's what we expect from them. And that's completely unreasonable.
Yeah.
And yet we want to treat them like fragile flowers that aren't able to comprehend or aren't able to deal with the truth around birth. And when we do that to the dads as well. And we leave them in a really vulnerable position, where you're left to deal with that. And you've got no tools to do that with. And it's the most cruelest thing you could probably do to a human being, is put them in a position of ultimate stress with probably the dearest people in their life, and then say, oh, and by the way, you're not going to have any tools to be able to do anything to change that outcome or help them or even console her, because we've not taught you them.
Yeah. And
the guilt that men feel is horrific, that because you see it as it's your role, your fault. That's your fault. She's in that position. She's in all that pain because of me. To give me a child, she's in all that pain. And we don't do enough to treat the fathers or the parents as part of an equal dyad in that responsibility, in that journey. We give all the support and all the education to the woman to prepare her for birth. We give her all the support afterwards. And we completely neglect the dad in that education and that support. And sometimes we even deliberately exclude them from that journey.
Yeah.
And it's, if we did that in the workplace to someone, that would be absolutely against employment law. You can't do that. You can't stick someone in a job role and not give them training, and then deliberately exclude them from training, and then put them in a position where they've got to do that job with no education, no tools, and then put pressure on them to perform. It's cruel.
Yeah, and I can remember in that first kind of 2-3 week periods when I were looking back. I think looking back, there were lots of positives there. Certainly for me as a dad, that I got to spend probably more time feeding and looking after my son than I probably would have done had my wife had a natural birth, been fine, been less incapacitated. I probably did more sort of nights feeding, and my wife couldn't breastfeed either for a number of reasons. So I probably learned a hell of a lot, and probably benefited a hell of a lot in those, as a person, and probably as a man and a partner as well, in those 2 to 3 weeks. And I actually enjoyed it, perversely enough. I mean, the stress, I can remember losing, I lost 1 pound a day for 10 days. So, and I'm pretty lean anyway. So I lost 1 pound a day for 10 days, and I was eating a lot of food. So the only reason I was losing that is lack of sleep and stress.
Yeah.
And you just kind of keep going because you have to do, but there's this concern that your wife's never going to get better, and this is never going to change. And that's unrealistic. And it's a bit, it's kind of overthinking, and it's anxiety inducing, for no reason. But I think looking back, in a perverse way, that kind of did me some good that time, but I was unprepared for it. So what do you think? So what needs to be done then to prepare the likes of me for those 2 to 3 weeks, given that you can't prepare for 2 hours sleep on being up 3 times? Because it's the breaking of the sleep that's the issue. It's not the hours, it's the breaking.
So you'll not be surprised to hear that women, because of the action of pregnancy, the hormones of pregnancy, the hormones of lactation, even those that are going to be bottle feeding, will still go into that hormone drive for the production of milk straight after birth. And there's a different sleep cycle that women fall into with their baby. Yep. So they fall into that deep recovery sleep, that regenerative sleep. They fall into that much more quickly. They stay in that for a little bit longer. So they benefit from better sleep for shorter periods. So they can essentially cope with that sleep deprivation. And if they're breastfeeding, the feeds at night, so the milk that's produced at night that the babies drink, is actually like a little bit of a sedative. And that again allows women to sleep that much more settled because they're babies, that much more settled. So, and I was a private midwife before I set up My-Expert Midwife. And what I used to suggest to partners, and remember when you're a private midwife, you get to spend hours and hours with partners preparing, so we used to have this, we called it a workshop. And we would spend about 4 hours, a morning or an afternoon, just me and dad to be. And we would just go through, right, what can we do in pregnancy to get prepared? Are you wanting to cook meals? No, right. Well, what about doubling up and then freezing meals and have them in the freezer? Or just order frozen food from Cook, right, what about vacuuming? Will it bother you if the place is a tip? Will it really, 2 weeks, will it bother you? No, that's fine. Will it bother her? Yes, right. Well, we'll need to get someone to come and do it. And that's someone that will come and vacuum and pick up the laundry and go. Who do you know that can do that? My sister, she'd be great. Right, well, let's get her roped in. Let's see if she minds dropping everything for 4 days in that first week and getting them into that mindset of getting all that help prepared in advance. Yep. And then the birth bit, that's the easiest bit, because you basically just say, look, it's not going to be easy. You're going to be exhausted. You just have to you just sort of suck it up and get through it if you can. But that early part where she doesn't need that much support, but you'll feel that you need to be there, that's the time to get that second birth person. So, like her friend or her mum or someone, get them in then. Yep. And you rest so that when it's time to go to hospital, you're fresh. Yep. Because you know yourself, that time at that cesarean section, you'll have been sleep deprived and stressed and anxious and thinking there's all these decisions that need to get made and I really don't know what to do for the best. And having someone there, for those early first hours, it just makes sure that you're fresh. And you're still there, you're still in the house if she needs you, but what you're doing is you're resting, because it's a big job. 24 hours, maybe even 36. And that's a long time to be on your feet. It's an awful long time to not be eating and drinking properly, to be going without sleep. So that was something we always talked about. Who would you have? Who would she have for those early first hours? And Yep. This is all agreed in pregnancy. This isn't coming as a shock to her. If she doesn't agree with it, if she wants you, then that's very different. You make a different call. But afterwards, the visitors, it's a massive, massive thing. And I've gone in to do postnatal checks on women when they're 2 days after the baby's born, and you can't get a seat in the lounge because it's just full of visitors. Yeah, it's getting passed round, and you take mom into the kitchen and she's in floods of tears because she doesn't want anyone there. Yeah. She just wants to rest. So that's the difficult one, though, because you almost have to convince her, or certainly the midwife will be saying, you really do want to think about having no one for the first 2 weeks. Just your inner circle, that will cook for you, clean for you, let you get some rest. And then the other thing I talk about is, and it's really old fashioned, but you know, if mum's breastfeeding, I would always suggest, and this is a conversation between the three of us, I would always bring up, right, what about having shifts? So mum is up all night feeding and changing, dad in a separate room, getting a full night's sleep.
Yeah.
Wakes up and it's a shift. So this isn't you wake up when you want, this is a 6:30, alarm goes off.
Yeah, we did that. Yeah.
Making breakfast,
yeah,
a really decent breakfast, because you can get through anything. And this is someone that's done a lot of night shifts. You can get through anything as long as you know at the time it's going to end, and you can get some rest and sleep. So then
completely
you're
agree.
fresh.
Yeah, completely agree.
But it's something that as a man, you know, a lot of men would feel really uncomfortable raising that as an option, really uncomfortable. And you daren't really speak about it to your friends or her friends, because it's almost seen as, well, that's an old-fashioned thing. I don't want to be viewed as that kind of man. But the biggest cause of anxiety, especially amongst new dads, is lack of sleep. Lack of control, lack of sleep. And for women, it's because of their pain. They're not on top of their pain relief. They're not sleeping, anxiety. So if you can solve that sleep problem and that pain relief problem, you get rid of a lot of the main causes of that anxiety. So if you're awake in the day, you're on top of her pain relief, you know? You've already said to the midwife, right, when does she need all these pills? Right, I'm on that. I've got my phones the alarms are all on. Right, here you go. Here's more. Here's your meals. Here's your drinks. Right, baby settled now. The biggest tip as well would be get yourself a sling. So it's just, the one I used was called a Moby, but there's loads on the market, and it's just yards and yards of fabric. You get up in the morning, you take off your top, you put your vest, your sling on, and it stays on there all day. And I mean, I don't even want to imagine what you'd look like if you answered the door in it to your friends, but it just means that when you've got baby, they're literally skin to skin the whole time. So if they're not with mum feeding, they're with you skin to skin. They're not in a cot or a carrier. They're there, they're upright. The digestive system's going. They're getting all these beautiful, friendly bacteria from you. That's the only bacteria, realistically, that your baby should be having for these first few weeks. To get their gut biome, their friendly gut bacteria, their friendly skin bacteria should just be what's in the normal household. There's no better way to do it than to have skin to skin. And they're warm and they're settled and they can hear your heartbeat. And it's a familiar smell, it's a familiar noise. And, you know, and that's it. And you're not thinking about, oh gosh, he won't settle in the cot, or I have to cuddle him and my arm's gone to sleep. They'll literally just stay in that sling.
It's really interesting. It's really interesting you mentioned the sleep thing, because that's once my wife, got to a point where she recovered, then we kind of saw that we needed, because we didn't have much kind of family help or family nearby in those early stages. So we definitely had an adult discussion around sleep shifts, and that was a massive help for us. I mean, I can remember at the time I was going through selling a business too. I was going through selling my first business, and it was in the final stages, and had no sleep, and she had to go back into hospital because, of a couple of reasons. So yeah, that whole sleep thing was kind of massive. Getting into just having an adult discussion about, listen, this is teamwork. This is it's almost a business relationship at that point, where there's got to be an agreement on who sleeps when and what time that ends. And that worked really well for us. And certainly by the second one, we had it down to a military precision. But the second one was an emergency, was a C-section too, probably brought on by the first one, right? So they were both kind of fear-inducing for me. But I think the main thing that surprised me after birth and then getting back out into the world, really, and it's probably the advent of social media, even though it's probably always been there, the kind of the pressures and the judgment on new mums, primarily from mothers, which I found massively eye-opening, judgment upon not breastfeeding and you're damaging your baby, judgment on the weight of your baby. That's always been there, right, within families. Or so-and-so weighs this, or great, you must have ate better than me during pregnancy. But I can imagine social media, and you'll know this, with a big community on social media, I can imagine the pressures on new mums now on feeding and, sort of, I mean, even happened to us. We had good friends who, knew my wife went through issues around feeding, but still started shaming people on social media that weren't breastfeeding, and that caused her endless, nights of stress and kind of, self-loathing, if you like, and that's what surprised me. I was expecting a social media community of sisterhood, and I kind of didn't find it.
And I think, the biggest problem that we have with breastfeeding and breastfeeding rates in this country is that lack of support. There is any woman that starts off deciding, I want to breastfeed, really should have all the support that they need to be able to achieve that. And we know that long labours, we know that extensive blood loss and surgery impact on when your milk comes in, because as humans, we're still, as a species, we've evolved so that the mother is the entity in the species that will be kept alive at the expense of any offspring, because nature sees to it that you can have more offspring. So it's not going to produce milk at the expense of the mother if that mother is not well enough to do that. And this is something that we forget, that anyone that's been through a traumatic labour, a long labour, has lost a lot of blood, has had major surgery, then the body will prioritise healing itself at the expense of that milk supply. And these are the women that need a lot more support in the hospital from, breastfeeding support workers, breastfeeding counsellors, to help with that initiation of supply, and then afterwards as well. And for many women, that support is just not there anymore. I think the NHS is having to rely more on charities. We've not been able to have face-to-face support. So women are then left in a position of, right, well, my mental health is now suffering because
massively
I can't do this anymore. And the sensible person is saying, no, you can't do this. This is breaking you. This is not healthy. And as a midwife in the NHS, it was tantamount to sacking to say that to a woman. You need to stop this now. You couldn't say that.
Yeah, well, that rings true. I mean, my wife, I know she tried, and of course, the more you try and it doesn't work, the more you don't want to try. Or certainly for her. And then, we brought our son home, and then probably 3 or 4 days of trying and not really understanding what it should feel like and not being sure if it's working, and then a midwife coming out, and then of course our child had lost too much weight, so we had to go back in, and then you have the guilt of, listen, I've starved my child. That makes me a terrible mother, and all that going through your mind.
That's it.
So we went, I should say she went through that, really. So it kind of put her off even trying the second time, because that first experience was, no one spent any time with her. And I'm not sure if you can show a woman how to breastfeed, right? But I'm sure there's probably a little bit that could have been done. But we were sent home without really it being able to be done. And then left to keep trying without any information. Even if someone had said, listen, try for 2 days, it don't work, Dad, get the bottle out and just get feeding. But we didn't. And, we were probably in a place where we didn't leave it too long because luckily there's always that scheduled visit within 4 or 5 days. But if it had gone on for much longer, might have been in a bit of a different situation.
But it's that guilt that you have because you take on the responsibility for those decisions when you didn't know what you didn't know. And that's the problem, isn't it?
That's exactly the problem. Yeah.
You're left to sort it out, and you don't know because no one's actually told you what's normal. Is this safe? Is this unsafe? Is this a normal amount of feed?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Even the measurements are, I mean, the sports nutritionist in me likes a bottle because I can see 100 mils. I can see, I'm used to that. I'm used to mixing a protein drink, right? So that kind of my, disciplined, kind of methodical brain, it speaks to, but that's not happening when you're, when you're breastfeeding. So, that was a really, I can remember feeling that was a massively lonely time, for both of us really, but I mean, especially for my wife, because, it's her job, right, to feed her child. And she's always told that, and mothers are always told that. And then when they're not accused, but when it appears that they're not doing that, then that, that causes some real turmoil. But it's an interesting, I mean, it was a lesson for us. And, certainly by the second one, we'd learned all the lessons that we probably learned from the first one to get us in the position for the second time. And every parent I know says the second one's a doddle. And and that's kind of how it was for us, really.
I think you learn so much, don't you, about then what not to feel guilty about, because you get so angry, and you're in the recovery and going through and working back through the birth and the recovery and the guilt and working through that, you realize that actually, no, I've got no reason to feel guilty. I was not given support. I was not given information. We were just left to get on with this and muddle through. This isn't fair, and it's that next time that you think, no, I dare you. I dare you to say something to me now.
You definitely get fiercer. You definitely get more. You definitely have more, sort of resolve. Just moving on to, I guess the change in perception of, sort of motherhood now. And I guess it used to be, I guess in days gone by, the workplace made a woman feel guilty for having children and therefore leaving work and giving up their career. So that was seen as a negative. And I think that's changing, but I don't know. And you'll be able to tell me better. And then is there a growing change now because of, again, maybe driven by social media, maybe just generational shift of where it's almost seen less independent to have children early, and you're sacrificing independence by doing so, sacrificing natural instincts to continue independence and working for longer. Is there a change in perception there?
I think it's such a complicated thing, isn't it? I think there's the job security now, and I think for a lot of women, they'll work now that bit longer so that they've got a house and that security to bring children up.
Yep.
And I think there's a reluctance among women to want to give up their career. I certainly didn't. I love working. I love what I do. And you wonder if the reason that women used to do it was out of guilt and expectation that that's what was supposed to have been done, rather than actually now we do take more ownership of our lives, and we can share paternity now. We can share paternity leave and maternity leave, and I think that's certainly a way forward where couples can actually look at, right, financially, who is better to take this leave? Do we share it? What do we do? And it offers more for women in the way of choice.
What do you think it's got to be done in the workplace for fathers?
I think they need more paternity leave. I think 2 weeks is not long enough. You need 2 weeks just to recover from the birth, never mind help. So I think 6 weeks is much more realistic. Financially, as a company, can you afford it if you've got your own company? I don't know, but I'm sure there's a way of banking holiday in advance, of taking occasional, maybe 2 or 3 weeks as unpaid, but spreading that lack of money across the year. There'll be definitely ways to do it, but 2 weeks is not long enough.
Yeah. Moving forward with the attention on the male partner. Yeah, no probs. I know you're busy. Just the last question. What's next for My-Expert Midwife?
Well, we are obviously expanding into education. So antenatal education, so antenatal classes, couples, small groups, shorter courses, but very, very topical. So we're doing a course we're bringing out one for grandparents.
Okay.
So just giving them all the updated information so that they're not saying to their daughter or their daughter-in-law, oh, you don't need to do that.
Yep.
Because again, it's that conflict, isn't it? All that conflicting advice and information.
Yep.
Birth partners, we're going to put a huge campaign together for birth partners.
Great.
Really putting a whole package of education and resource.
Great.
So we're reframing it totally.
Yep.
And hopefully change that narrative about what dads are actually doing for birth preparation, to give you the tools.
Yeah, it needs it. Listen, Lesley, I know you're going. You're busy. You're a busy person. Thank you for your time there. Really appreciate it. It's been a good chat. We'll have to get you back on. We'll have to get you back on and do part 2. But
That'll be lovely.
That's cool. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.